Welcome to Mishna study. We're up to Masechet Demai Perek Gimel Mishna Aleph. Over here, we're going to move on to a new topic, and that's going to be who is allowed to even eat Demai. So now we're going to speak about what we're allowed to give the poor and how we're allowed to, give the poor some things that are even Demai. Harambam is going to have a nice, interesting perush over here as well. So let's jump into it. Ma'achilim et ha'aniyim Demai. ומאכילים את האכסניה דמאי. רבן גמליאל היה מאכיל את פועליו דמאי. גבאי צדקה, בית שמאי אומרים נותנים את המעוסר לשאינו מעשר, ואת שאינו מעוסר למעשר. נמצאו כל אדם אוכלים מתוקן. חכמים אומרים גובים סתם, ומחלקים סתם, ורוצה לתקן, יתקן. So firstly, a person is allowed to give, he's allowed to feed the aniyim demai. And we basically see from here that the aniyim, the poor person, is allowed to eat demai. Why do we allow them to eat demai? So we could take a little bit of the burden off the person who's providing the tzedakah, and it makes it easier. It's a derech kula for that person. So he would provide more for the aniyim. So we're allowed to give the aniyim, the poor people, demai to eat. Right? Again, this is food that we're not sure if all the trumot ma'asrot were taken from it. We're allowed to go ahead and give that to the ani. Now, similarly, you're allowed to also give the aksanya demai. Aksanya, Rambam explains over here that these are the guests, and we're allowed to do so because of the achnasat orchim. We want to have people. Because Rambam says achnasat orchim is amud etan b'toratenu. It's an important pillar in our Torah, and therefore, because of its importance, Chachamim also were mekel, right? They were lenient on people to actually feed their guests demai as well. Now, not everyone agrees that aksanya over here is translated as guests, and Rambam did so, and he said it's an issue. It's inyan of achnasat orchim. I know Rashi, others explain it aksanya as the legion, right, an army. Right, so it's a little bit a different perush. Rabban Gamliel over here now Mishnah would feed his workers demai. Right, it's not like Rabban Gamliel, but over here we see he would actually do that. He would feed his workers in the field. He would feed them demai. Now, Gaba'et tzedakah, the people are giving out the charity, giving out the food in the city. So Bet Shammai says they collected the food. They know they collected from someone who's ne'eman, someone who separates all his trumot and masrot. They have something that's me'usar, something that was the trumot and masrot were taken from it. So Bet Shammai says take those things that were already trumot and masrot were taken from it and give it to someone who's not going to separate the trumot and masrot. Give it to a poor person who's not so, careful about trumot and masrot, and someone, the homeowner who's not as careful. He doesn't separate his trumot and masrot. You'll take that and give it to a poor person who is careful. So what happens? We know everybody ends up eating ochlim metukam. Everybody eats appropriately. Everyone's going to eat something that's tithe, that's me'usar, right? Because the person, who's receiving, the person who, let's say the ani, who usually, separates his trumot and masrot, he's receiving it from someone who didn't, separate. So he's going to take care of it on his own. And the ani, the other poor person who's not so careful, he already received something that was already separated, trumot and masrot, right? So everyone's going to eat something with tukan. Everyone's going to eat something that is trumot and masrot was separated from it. Now, Chachamim say, or before I even go into Chachamim, Rambam points out something over here. In Bet Shammai's opinion, you may ask, right? What do you mean? We just said in the beginning of the Mishnah that the aniyim are allowed to eat demai. Why do we care about which poor person gets what? We just said the poor people are allowed to eat demai. So Rambam explains that over here, it's not necessarily that the aniyim eating demai. The subject in the beginning of the Mishnah was ma'achilim et aniyim. We could feed the aniyim demai. But when the aniyim receive their food, they may receive it as a daily meal. And that's when Hachamim allowed them to go ahead and eat the food without separating, all the laws of demai. But let's say they receive a lump sum and they have enough money to buy a week's worth of food, right? Then they have to, when they purchase, whatever they do, they need to separate demai as well, right? They're not always just allowed to, I'm poor, now I can just go eat whatever I want. They're not allowed to say that. Rather, if they receive a meal's worth, then they're allowed to eat it as is. But if they're a poor person who's buying stuff and they receive tzedakah and they're buying things with it, then they're not allowed. They have to actually separate all the trumot and masrot, like anyone else would with demai. And Rambam actually says where it could be medayik from the Mishnah, where it says ma'achilim. Ma'achilim is lashon hif'il. Hif'il is one of the binyanim, right? It's a verb that you're doing an action to someone else. You're giving someone else food. You're giving them to eat, right? It doesn't say ha'aniyim ochlim demai, right? The poor people aren't eating demai. That's not what we said. We said ma'achilim. You're allowed to give the aniyim food to eat, right? So it's really a verb of hif'il that you're actually providing for them. So if you're providing for them that one meal, they're allowed to eat it, right? But if they're going ahead and buy for themselves, then they need to also separate the masrot, right? So that actually fits in with everything Bet Shammai is saying. Bet Shammai is saying that if we're collecting money, the Gabayit Tzedakah collecting money from everyone, they give it to the ani, right? Or they're collecting a lot of meals, like a week's worth of meals, and they're giving it to the ani. Make sure to give the ones that's not miusar, to someone that's going to take care of the trumot and masrot. That's Bet Shammai's opinion. Chachamim say no. Govim stam, muhalikim stam, pero etaken. No, collect it, regular. You give it out, you collect it random, you give it out random, and whoever wants to take care of it, fix it, whoever wants to separate trumot and masrot should do so. Right? It's not the responsibility for anyone, whoever it may be, right? Each the Gabayit Tzedakah to go ahead and make sure, this specific meal gets this specific person. Yeah, that's basically it. Halacha is like hachamim, like we said, hachamim, that you just collect it randomly, give it out randomly, and whoever wants to separate on their own, they can separate on their own. It's not the ba'etz tzedakah's position to go ahead and take care of that. And lastly is halacha is not like Rabban Gamliel either. We mentioned earlier that you're not allowed to go ahead and give your workers demai, but you are allowed to give according to Rambam, you're allowed to give the machalim, the poor people, and achnasat orchim, you're allowed to give them demai.